The rain fell in cold, relentless sheets, blurring the city lights into a watercolor wash of neon and gloom. Inside the 24-hour warmth of the Starlight Diner, Leo felt the dampness in his bones anyway. It was the kind of weariness that seeped deeper than skin, settling into the hollow spaces of a life lived on the knife's edge of empty. He moved between chipped formica tables and cracked vinyl booths, a ghost in a slightly too large apron. His smile was a practiced, weary thing, a tool of his trade as essential as the coffee pot in his hand. The diner was quiet now, surrendering to the late hour. Only a few stragglers remained, nursing stale coffee, their faces illuminated by the lonely glow of their phones. The air was thick with the smell of old grease and brewing coffee, a scent Leo once found comforting but now only associated with aching feet and the meager weight of coins in his pocket. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Almost 2 in the morning. His shift was nearly over. One final task remained, cleaning the grill for Gus, the cook. Gus was a man carved from granite and gristle, his moods as unpredictable as the diner's ancient plumbing. "Wipe it down good tonight, kid," Gus grunted from his perch on a stool, not looking up from his newspaper. Health inspectors sniffing around again. "Always do, Gus," Leo said, his voice soft. He grabbed a scraper and a damp cloth, the familiar motions automatic. His mind was already drifting away from the diner, towards the cold, single room he called home. He thought of the unpaid utility bill on his small table, its red-stamped, urgent, a silent accusation. He thought of the gnawing hunger in his own stomach, a dull ache he had learned to live with. There was one small comfort awaiting him. His staff meal. Every shift, he was allowed one free meal. It was often the only substantial food he ate all day. Tonight, Gus had set aside a bowl of the beef stew, thick and rich. The steam rising from it was a promise of warmth, a small, tangible reward for another 12 hours survived. It sat on the stainless steel counter, a beacon in the dreary landscape of his night. Leo finished the grill, the metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He washed his hands, the rough soap doing little to scrub away the deep-seated fatigue. He walked toward the counter, his eyes fixed on the bowl of stew. His stomach gave a hopeful clench. That was when the bell above the door chimed, a frail, tinkling sound against the storm's drumming. Both Leo and Gus looked up. An old woman stood hesitating in the doorway, framed by the dark, wet night. She was a fragile silhouette, stooped and thin, clutching a threadbare shawl around her shoulders. Rainwater dripped from the hem of her worn coat, forming a small puddle on the linoleum. Her face, etched with 1,000 tiny lines, was pale and drawn. But it was her eyes that caught Leo. They were wide and searching, filled with a deep, quiet desperation that he recognized instantly. It was the look of someone who had been invisible for a very, very long time. Gus let out an audible sigh of irritation. "We're closing up, lady," he called out, his voice sharp. "Kitchen's off." The woman flinched, her shoulders hunching as if bracing against a physical blow. She didn't speak, only gave a small, defeated nod. She started to turn back toward the door, back into the cold, unforgiving night. Something inside Leo cracked. It wasn't a loud shattering, but a quiet, splintering fissure in the wall of his own exhaustion. He saw his own hunger, his own loneliness, his own quiet desperation reflected in her frail form. He saw a human being on the verge of being broken by a world that had stopped seeing her. He looked from the retreating woman to the steaming bowl of stew on the counter. His stew. His one warm meal. His stomach protested, a low, painful growl. It was a simple calculation of survival. His hunger versus hers. The calculation was over before it began. "Wait," Leo called out, his voice surprisingly firm. The woman stopped, her hand on the door. She turned slowly, her expression a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Gus shot Leo a dark, warning glare. Leo ignored it. He walked to the counter, picked up the bowl of stew, and grabbed a spoon. He walked over to the cleanest booth, the one by the window, and set the meal down gently. "Please," he said, his voice soft again. "Sit. It's on the house." The old woman stared at the stew, then up at Leo. Her eyes, which had been clouded with weariness, sharpened with a sudden, startling intensity. It was as if she were looking right through his skin, weighing the very substance of his soul. "You're sure?" she rasped, her voice thin and dry like autumn leaves. "I'm sure," Leo said, offering her the simple, genuine smile he saved for moments that mattered. No one should be out in a storm like this without something warm in their belly. She hesitated for a moment longer, then slowly, stiffly, shuffled to the booth and slid onto the vinyl seat. Her hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. She didn't eat immediately, just held it, staring down at the reflection of the diner lights on the surface of the stew. Leo watched her for a second, a strange warmth spreading through his chest, chasing away some of the cold. It was a better feeling than the stew would have been. He noticed her shivering, her thin shawl offering little protection. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his own jacket, a faded, worn denim thing, but clean and warm from his body heat, and draped it over her narrow shoulders. She looked up, startled. "You'll be cold." "I'll be all right," he said. "My apartment is just a couple of blocks away." A lie. It was over a mile, and the walk would be brutal in the rain. But it was a necessary lie. Gus was watching the exchange, his face a thundercloud. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" he hissed as Leo walked back behind the counter. "That's your meal. And my jacket comes out of your pay if she walks off with it." "It's just a meal, Gus," Leo said quietly, not meeting his eye. "She needed it more than I did." "That's what they all say," Gus grumbled, turning back to his paper, effectively ending the conversation. Leo finished his closing duties in silence, his stomach now a tight, empty knot. But the hollowness in his chest was gone. He snuck glances at the old woman. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if savoring every single spoonful. When she was finished, she wiped the bowl clean with a piece of bread Gus had begrudgingly provided at Leo's request. She sat for a moment, the empty bowl in front of her, wrapped in his jacket. Then, she slid out of the booth, leaving the jacket folded neatly on the seat. She walked to the counter, her steps seeming a little steadier now. She reached into a small, worn purse. "I'd like to pay," she said, her voice stronger. "There's no need," Leo insisted gently. "It was my pleasure." She looked at him again with that piercing gaze. "Kindness should never be taken for granted," she said. She opened her purse and pulled out a single, folded bill. It was old and creased. She pressed it into his hand. "For you. Not for the diner." "You really don't have to," he started to say, but she closed his fingers over the bill with her own surprisingly strong ones. "I insist," she said. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It transformed her face, hinting at a beauty long faded by time and hardship. "Thank you, young man. You have no idea what this meant." And with that, she turned and walked out the door, disappearing back into the rainy darkness from which she came. Leo stood there for a long moment. He looked at the door, then down at his hand. He slowly unfolded the bill. He expected a 1, maybe a 5. It was a $100 bill. His breath hitched. He stared at it, his heart pounding. It was more than he made in a full day's tips. He looked at Gus, who was now staring at the bill with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Well, I'll be," Gus muttered, shaking his head. "Maybe you're not as dumb as you look, kid." But Leo wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about her last words. You have no idea what this meant. The strange intensity in her eyes. The quiet dignity she carried. The feeling that this was more than just a simple meal. It was a transaction of a different kind, one whose value he couldn't yet comprehend. He tucked the bill carefully into his pocket. The walk home was cold and wet, just as he knew it would be. The hunger in his stomach was sharp. But as he walked, he felt a flicker of something new, something that felt suspiciously like hope. He had given away his last meal, but he felt fuller than he had in years. He didn't know it yet, but the simple act of giving away a bowl of stew had set a stone rolling, an avalanche of events that would irrevocably alter the landscape of his world. Miles away, the old woman settled into the plush leather seat of a silent, waiting Bentley. The car pulled away from the curb as smoothly as a ship setting sail on a calm sea. The city's blurred lights slid past the tinted windows. She shrugged off the wet, threadbare coat and shawl, revealing an impeccably tailored wool suit beneath. The transformation was startling. The stooped, frail creature from the diner was gone. In her place sat Elara Vance, a name that hadn't been spoken in the press for over a decade but still echoed with immense power in the gilded halls of finance and industry. Her face, no longer deliberately pinched with hardship, held the sharp, intelligent lines of a woman who had built and commanded an empire. The desperate weariness in her eyes was replaced by a look of profound, contemplative shock. "Well, Arthur," she said, her voice now the rich, clear instrument of a lifelong commander. The man in the driver's seat, Arthur, a man whose loyalty was as unwavering as his stony expression, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "It has been a long time since I have seen you this affected, Madame Vance." Elara leaned her head back against the seat, a deep sigh escaping her lips. "He gave me his jacket," she whispered, almost to herself. "He gave me his only meal." For 20 years, since her husband's great betrayal, a man who had co-founded their empire only to try and swindle her out of it on his deathbed, revealing a lifetime of emotional fraud, Elara had lived in a fortress of her own making. Her mansion was a gilded cage, her wealth a wall to keep the world at bay. She had become a ghost in her own life, convinced that humanity was a cesspool of greed and self-interest. Her heart had become a cold, smooth stone in her chest. These clandestine excursions, disguised as the most vulnerable member of society, were her bitter experiments. They were designed to prove her thesis, that compassion was a myth, that everyone had a price, that kindness was merely a transaction. For years, the world had proven her right. People had ignored her, sneered at her, tried to rob her. Each encounter had added another layer of ice around her heart. Until tonight. That boy, with his tired eyes and genuine smile, had taken a hammer to that ice. He had asked for nothing. He had expected nothing. In a world that had taught her to see only ulterior motives, he had shown her simple, unadorned goodness. He had nothing, she murmured, still trying to process it. And he gave it all. "What are your instructions, madam?" Arthur asked, his voice even. Elara was silent for a long moment, watching the rain-streaked city pass by. The cold stone in her chest was beginning to thaw. A strange, unfamiliar warmth was spreading through her veins. It was the warmth of that boy's worn denim jacket, the warmth of that simple bowl of stew. It was the warmth of a faith she thought long dead. "Arthur," she said, her voice firm with a purpose she hadn't felt in decades. "I want to know everything about him. His name, his life, his struggles, his dreams. Everything." "It will be done," Arthur replied, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction in his own stoic eyes. Elara Vance looked out the window, but she wasn't seeing the city anymore. She was seeing a tired young man's face, illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights of a cheap diner. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt a desire not just to observe the world, but to change it. The next 2 days passed in a blur of normalcy that felt strange and unsettling to Leo. He worked his shifts, served his coffee, and endured Gus's relentless grumbling. He used the $100 bill to pay his overdue utility bill, the relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. But the memory of the old woman lingered, a quiet hum beneath the surface of his daily routine. He found himself scanning the faces of every customer who walked in, half hoping, half fearing he would see her again. On the third day, a man in a crisp, dark suit walked into the diner during the afternoon lull. He was the kind of man who didn't belong in the Starlight Diner. His shoes cost more than Leo's monthly rent. He exuded an air of quiet, unshakable competence. He walked directly to the counter where Leo was wiping down salt shakers. "I am looking for Leo Martinez," the man said. His voice was polite but held an undeniable note of authority. "I'm Leo," he replied, his guard immediately up. His first thought was a debt collector. The man, who introduced himself as Arthur, didn't waste time. "I represent a private benefactor who was very impressed by an act of kindness you performed recently. This benefactor has authorized me to extend an offer to you." Leo stared, bewildered. "An offer?" "A job interview," Arthur stated plainly. "For the position of personal assistant. The compensation would be significant." He named a salary that made Leo's head spin. It was more than he made in a year. I don't understand," Leo stammered. "Who is this benefactor?" "The old woman?" Arthur's expression remained impassive. "All questions will be answered at the interview. If you are interested," he placed a small, elegant business card on the counter. It held only an address, a prestigious one in the city's financial district, and a time for the following day. "A car will be waiting for you at this address tomorrow morning. Should you choose to accept the ride." And with that, he turned and left, leaving Leo staring at the card, his heart hammering against his ribs. It felt like a dream, a trick. Gus, who had overheard the exchange, scoffed. "Probably some scam, kid. Don't be a fool." But Leo couldn't shake the feeling. The intensity of the old woman's eyes. The quiet authority of the man named Arthur. It felt too real, too strange to be a simple con. He had nothing to lose. His life was a dead end of long hours and empty pockets. This, whatever it was a door. He didn't know where it led, but it was the first new door he had seen in years. He decided to open it. The next morning, dressed in his only clean, pressed shirt and his least worn pair of trousers, Leo stood at the designated corner. A sleek, black car, the same one he now vaguely recognized from the rainy night, pulled up silently beside him. Arthur was at the wheel. The drive was silent, winding through the city's arteries until they reached the towering glass and steel skyscraper from the business card. Leo felt impossibly small and out of place as he was led through a lobby of gleaming marble and hushed whispers. They rode a private elevator that ascended with breathtaking speed, the silence inside absolute. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling penthouse office. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that seemed to stretch to the edge of the world. The space was furnished with an understated elegance that screamed of immense wealth. It was cold, beautiful, and intimidating. And sitting behind a large, dark wood desk was the old woman. But she was not the old woman from the diner. Her hair, once a matted gray, was styled into a sophisticated silver coif. She wore a tailored suit of deep sapphire blue. The frail, stooped posture was gone, replaced by an upright, regal bearing. The lines of hardship on her face were still there, but now they looked like lines of wisdom and command. Only her eyes were the same, piercing, intelligent, and currently fixed on him. Leo stopped dead, his mind struggling to connect the two images. The fragile, hungry woman and this powerful, imposing figure. "Please, Leo." "Sit," she said, her voice the clear, strong tone he now remembered from her parting words. He moved numbly to the chair in front of her desk and sat down. "I imagine you have questions," she began, a small, wry smile on her lips. "You're—" He started, unable to finish the sentence. "My name is Alara Vance," she said simply. "And yes, I was the woman in your diner 3 nights ago." She proceeded to explain everything. Her self-imposed exile from the world, her disillusionment with humanity, her bitter tests of compassion. She spoke of her late husband, of the deep betrayal that had frozen her heart and convinced her that altruism was a lie. She spoke without self-pity, stating the facts of her emotional life as if she were reading a stock report. "For 20 years, I have searched for proof that I was wrong," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I went out in storms, looking like the most wretched soul I could imagine, and every time, the world proved me right. People were cruel, or indifferent, or selfish." She paused, her eyes softening. "And then I walked into your diner. And you, a young man with far less than anyone I have ever known, gave me everything you had. Your food. Your jacket. Your kindness. You asked for nothing in return." Tears welled in her eyes, genuine and unguarded. "You didn't just give me a bowl of stew, Leo. You gave me back a piece of my faith in humanity. You dismantled a wall I have spent decades building." Leo was speechless, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her story, of her wealth, of the strange, secret world he had stumbled into. "This isn't just a job for a personal assistant," she continued, leaning forward. "That was a pretense. The position I am offering you is far more important. I am reactivating my philanthropic foundation, the Vance Foundation. For years, it has been dormant, a ghost of an idea. I am dedicating the remainder of my life and my fortune to it. But I cannot do it alone. My vision is clouded by wealth and cynicism. I see balance sheets and investment returns. I need a heart. I need a moral compass." She looked at him, her expression a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "I need you, Leo. I want you to run the foundation with me. To be its public face, its guiding principle. I have the resources. You have the character. Together, I believe we can do some real good in this world." The air in the room was thick with the weight of her offer. It wasn't just a job. It was a new life. A new purpose. He, Leo Martinez, the tired waiter, was being asked to help steer a billion-dollar ship. It was terrifying. It was absurd. And it was the truest thing he had ever heard. He thought of the tired faces at the diner, the quiet desperation he saw every day. He thought of the cold, the hunger, the invisibility. He had a chance not just to escape that life, but to reach back and help others who were still trapped in it. He looked at Alara Vance, the wounded billionaire, and saw not a powerful mogul, but a lonely woman who had been given a second chance, just as he was being given his first. He took a deep breath, the cold, sterile air of the office suddenly feeling charged with potential. "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Yes, I will." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Leo was swept from the greasy spoon world of the Starlight Diner into the stratosphere of global philanthropy. He was given a beautiful apartment in one of Alara's buildings, a wardrobe of clothes that cost more than his old car, and a team of people to teach him the mechanics of running a massive foundation. But the true education happened in the quiet moments with Alara. They spent hours together, not in boardrooms, but in her vast, silent library. It was there that the real work was done. He told her about his life, the constant, grinding struggle, the small joys and the overwhelming burdens of poverty. He spoke of the dignity of people who had nothing, their resilience, their hidden kindnesses. In return, Alara slowly, carefully, unveiled the person behind the legend. She spoke of her childhood, her ambition, the joy she had once found in building something from nothing with the man she loved. She recounted the devastating discovery of his betrayal, the way it had hollowed her out, turning her success into a cold, lonely monument to a lie. "He made me believe that love was a transaction," she confided one afternoon, her voice thick with old pain. "That every act of affection had a price tag. It made me deaf to the real thing." "Kindness doesn't have a price," Leo said softly. "It's the one thing you can give away and still have more of." She looked at him, a real, warm smile reaching her eyes. "That, Leo, is why you are here. To remind me of truths I had long since forgotten." He wasn't just her employee, he was becoming her confidant, her friend, the grandson she never had. He brought life back into the sterile mansion. He insisted they eat their meals in the kitchen instead of the cavernous dining hall. He persuaded her to walk in the gardens. He made her laugh, a sound that at first seemed rusty and unused but slowly grew more frequent and full. Their first major project for the foundation was Leo's idea. He called it the Starlight Fund, a program dedicated to providing microgrants and emergency aid to service industry workers, people one broken-down car or medical bill away from disaster. Elara embraced it with a passion that astonished her entire staff. Leo's life had transformed, but he himself had not. The wealth was a tool, not an identity. He was still the same man who had given away his dinner on a rainy night. His core of quiet empathy was now simply amplified, given the resources to enact real change. The connection between the young man and the old woman deepened, a bond forged not of wealth or status, but of shared vulnerability and a mutual desire to heal, both the world and themselves. Their quiet, productive world was shattered by the flash of a camera. They were leaving a small community center in a rough part of town, a potential recipient of a grant. Leo was helping Elara down the steps, his hand on her elbow. It was a simple, caring gesture. But a freelance photographer, tipped off by a disgruntled former Vance employee, was hiding across the street. The next morning, the picture was on the front page of the city's most voracious tabloid. The headline screamed, "Reclusive billionaire Elara Vance and her mystery boy Toy, the vulnerable tycoon being conned?" The story was a toxic masterpiece of insinuation and cruelty. It painted Leo as a cunning opportunist, a handsome young grifter who had preyed on a lonely, elderly woman. It dredged up his past, framing his poverty not as a struggle but as a motive. They even found and interviewed Gus from the diner. "Yeah, the kid was always looking for an angle," Gus was quoted as saying, his words twisted to sound malicious. "Played the part of the saint, but he always had his eyes on the prize." The storm broke with a fury that stunned them both. The story went viral. News vans camped outside Elara's mansion and Leo's apartment building. Every major news network picked it up. Leo's face was everywhere, his name dragged through the mud. He was no longer Leo Martinez, the quiet man with a good heart. He was the diner Don Juan, the billionaire's boy. The public, hungry for a scandal, devoured it. The narrative was simple and ugly, a classic gold digger story. He was harassed on the street. People whispered and pointed. The warmth and respect he had started to feel were replaced by the icy glare of suspicion and contempt. The poison began to seep into him. He started to see the doubt in people's eyes, even within the foundation. The weight of the world's cynicism was crushing. He saw how the scandal was affecting Elara. The press was merciless, portraying her as a senile fool, her grand return to public life a pathetic farce. Her legacy, which she had just begun to rebuild, was being tarnished by his presence. The thought was a shard of glass in his heart. He was hurting her. The one person who had shown him such incredible faith, he was repaying her by becoming the source of her humiliation. After a week of relentless, escalating harassment, he couldn't bear it any longer. The love and respect he felt for her twisted into a painful, protective instinct. He had to remove the target from her back. And the target was him. He went to her that evening. He found her in the library, staring out the window at the flashing lights of the news vans parked at the end of her long driveway. She looked tired, older than she had in weeks. "This has to stop," he said, his voice strained. "It's just noise, Leo," she said, though her voice lacked its usual strength. "Vicious, empty noise. We will rise above it." "But we can't," he said, the words tearing at him. "They're using me to destroy you. Everything we're building, they're turning it into a joke. I can't be the reason your name is dragged through the mud." "My name has been through mud before," she said, turning to face him. "This is nothing." "It's not nothing to me," he cried, his composure finally cracking. "You gave me a life I could never have imagined. You trusted me. And all I've done is bring this ugliness to your doorstep. I can't do it. I won't be your downfall." He took a step back, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. "I have to go, Ilara. I have to leave the Foundation. I have to disappear. It's the only way to make it stop." "Leo, no," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Don't let them win. Don't let their cynicism break what we've built." "It's already broken," he said, the lie bitter in his own ears. He was breaking it. He was running away. But he convinced himself it was a noble sacrifice. To protect her, he had to leave her. He saw the deep, profound pain in her eyes, the same look of betrayal she had described from her past. He was doing the very thing she had feared for decades, someone she trusted was abandoning her. The irony was devastating. But he couldn't see another way. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And without another word, he turned and walked out of the library, out of the mansion, and out of her life. The silence he left behind was heavier and more absolute than any the house had ever known. Ilara Vance was alone again, the ice he had so carefully melted beginning to creep back around her heart. Leo checked into a cheap motel on the far side of the state, a place of peeling paint and the faint smell of despair. He paid in cash and used a fake name. He left his phone in the apartment, cut off all ties. He was a ghost again, just as he had been before. But this was a different kind of invisibility. Before, it was the world that didn't see him. Now, he was actively hiding from it. The days bled into one another. He stayed in his room, watching the news on a flickering, staticky television. The story raged on for a few more days, his disappearance fueling speculation that he had taken a payoff and fled. The narrative seemed to be setting in stone, he was guilty. He felt a hollowness in his chest that was worse than any hunger he had ever known. He had walked away from the only person who had ever truly seen him, and from the purpose that had given his life meaning. His attempt to protect her felt like a catastrophic failure. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Ilara felt the old coldness returning. The house was silent again. The staff walked on eggshells. For 2 days, she did nothing, adrift in a sea of grief and disappointment. The world had won. Its ugliness had destroyed the one pure thing she had found. But on the 3rd day, something shifted. As she stared at another cruel headline, a spark of anger ignited within her. Not the bitter, cynical anger of her past, but a hot, righteous fury. They were wrong. The world was wrong. And Leo, in his noble, misguided pain, was wrong to run. He had taught her about the strength of kindness. It was time she taught him about the strength of fighting back. She was Ilara Vance. She had built an empire, faced down corporate raiders, and survived the deepest betrayals. She would not be brought down by tabloid lies and public opinion. And she would not lose the best person she had ever known to the wolves. She picked up the phone. "Arthur," she said, her voice like steel. "Arrange a press conference. The main ballroom. Invite everyone." 2 days later, the ballroom at the Vance Tower was a circus. Every major news network was there, cameras packed shoulder to shoulder, reporters buzzing with anticipation. They expected a quiet, managed statement, perhaps the announcement of Leo's official termination. Ilara Vance walked onto the stage alone. She looked neither frail nor foolish. She looked powerful, her eyes blazing with a fire they hadn't seen in decades. She walked to the podium and stood in the blinding glare of the lights, a silent commander surveying her troops. She didn't read from a statement. She spoke from the heart. "For 20 years, she began, her voice ringing with clarity and power, "I have lived as a recluse. I did this because I had come to believe that the world was a cold and greedy place. I believed that compassion was an illusion and that every person had a price. I am ashamed to say, I lost my faith in humanity. A hush fell over the room. This was not what they expected. To prove my bitter theory, I would occasionally disguise myself as someone with nothing, to see how the world would treat me. And for years, you all proved me right. She let that sink in. Until one rainy night, I walked into a diner, a cold, hungry, and hopeless old woman. And a young waiter, a man who had less than anyone in this room, a man who was hungry himself, gave me his only meal. In his dingy motel room, Leo watched, his breath caught in his throat. He didn't know who I was, Elara continued, her voice thick with emotion. He saw a human being in need, and he acted. With no expectation of reward. That young man was Leo Martinez. You have called him a gold digger. A con man. You have taken an act of pure, selfless kindness and twisted it into something ugly and transactional. You have done this because a world that believes in cynicism is easier to understand than a world that believes in goodness. It is a smaller, meaner, and poorer world. And I will not live in it any longer. Tears were now streaming down her face, but her voice never faltered. Leo Martinez did not con me. He saved me. He saved me from my own bitterness, from my own fortress of wealth. He reminded me that the greatest fortune a person can have is not in a bank account, but in their character. His kindness is the single greatest investment I have ever made. She looked directly into the main camera, as if speaking straight to Leo. He left my side because he believed he was protecting me from you, she said, her gaze sweeping across the stunned reporters. He was wrong. The only thing I need protection from is a world that would crucify a good man. Leo, if you are watching this, come home. Your work is not finished. Our work is not finished. Please, come home. She held her gaze for a moment longer, a powerful, vulnerable queen who had just laid her heart bare for the world to see. Then, she turned and walked off the stage, leaving behind a room full of stunned, silent reporters. In the motel room, Leo was openly weeping. He saw it all with a sudden, painful clarity. He hadn't been protecting her, he had been abandoning her. He had let the cynics win. He had betrayed their bond out of fear. He stood up, his mind made up. He had to go back. He had to stand by her side. He didn't know how, but he would find a way. As if on cue, there was a firm, solid knock on his motel room door. He opened it to find Arthur standing there, his expression as impassive as ever, though his eyes held a deep glimmer of respect. "The car is waiting," Arthur said simply. "Madame Vance is expecting you." The ride back was a journey from shadow into light. When he arrived at the mansion, the news vans were still there, but their presence felt different now. Less like predators, more like witnesses. He found Elara not in a grand office or library, but in the small, warm kitchen. She was sitting at the simple wooden table, a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up as he entered, and the smile that spread across her face was one of pure, unadulterated relief. He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," was all he could manage, his voice thick. "Don't be," she said, standing up and walking toward him. She placed her hands on his arms. "You have a good heart, Leo. Sometimes, a good heart needs to learn how to be a brave one, too." "I won't run again," he promised, looking her in the eye. "I know," she said. "From now on, we face the noise together." In that quiet kitchen, far from the cameras and the noise, their bond was reforged, stronger and more resilient than before. It was no longer just a partnership. It was a family. 1 year later, the world looked very different. The scandal had faded, replaced by an inspiring story of friendship and philanthropy that had captured the public's imagination. The Vance Foundation was a powerhouse of positive change, and Leo Martinez was its respected, beloved face. He moved through the world with a quiet confidence, his innate kindness now matched by a steady, unwavering strength. He had not let the wealth change his core, but he had allowed it to broaden his vision of what was possible. The Foundation's flagship program, the Starlight Fund, had helped thousands. But their proudest achievement was a smaller, more personal project. On the first anniversary of the night they met, Leo and Alara stood on a familiar street corner. The rain was falling again, a soft, gentle drizzle this time. Before them stood the old Starlight Diner. But it was different now. A new sign glowed warmly above the door, reading simply, "The Starlight." They had bought it. They had refurbished it, cleaning the floors and fixing the torn vinyl, but they had kept its heart. It was still a simple diner. But now, every night from midnight to 6 in the morning, it transformed. The cash register was closed. The menu was simplified to one item, a hot, nourishing meal. And it was free to anyone who walked through the door. No questions asked. Leo and Alara went inside. The air smelled of fresh bread and simmering stew. A small, dedicated staff of volunteers served the late-night crowd, the tired, the lonely, the hungry. Alara took a seat in the booth by the window, the very same one she had sat in a year ago. Leo, wearing a simple, clean apron over his tailored shirt, went behind the counter. He ladled a bowl of thick beef stew, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud. He brought it to her table and set it down gently. He slid into the seat across from her. Outside, the rain fell. Inside, the diner was an island of warmth and light. They didn't speak for a long moment, simply sharing the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other perfectly. "You know," Alara said softly, looking around at the quiet dignity of the people eating around them. "This is the richest I have ever felt." Leo smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached deep into his eyes. "Me too," he said. He had given away a bowl of stew and, in return, had been given the world. But he had come to understand that the world was not the wealth or the mansion or the prestige. It was this. This feeling. The simple, profound act of giving, of seeing another human being, and of offering them a little warmth against the cold. It was a circle, now complete. A bowl of stew, given in kindness, had returned 1,000-fold, feeding not just the hungry, but the very soul of a city.